June 22, 1943, 0410 hours. South of Belgorod on the Eastern Front. A pale gray sky hung over the steppe as a thin mist rolled through drainage gullies cut by spring runoff. The German 167th Infantry Division held a narrow defensive line that protected a supply route feeding artillery positions behind the front. Soviet armored units had pushed closer every week. Steel tracks crushed wheat fields. Dust clouds signaled each thrust before the first shells landed. Tank crews tested German positions at dawn, probing for weak spots. The pattern was predictable and deadly. Anti-tank guns shifted positions every night, yet losses grew. Mines were scarce. Engineering units were overworked. The line thinned under pressure. Corporal Wilhelm Richter moved along a shallow ditch beside his platoon's position. He studied the terrain with the same focus he once used when surveying drainage sites in Munich. He measured slope angles with his eyes. He checked soil density with the heel of his boot. He looked for choke points where a vehicle would slow. He carried no special authority. He was 28 years old and held a junior rank. His advantage came from civilian skill. He spent his pre-war career designing municipal drainage pits and reinforcing foundations. He knew rebar, concrete load paths, and ground failure patterns. War forced him to apply those skills in new ways. Soviet armored assaults caused most casualties in this sector. T-34 tanks advanced in tight wedges. The first vehicles broke wire, crushed light obstacles, and exposed German firing positions. Infantry followed close behind. When anti-tank guns missed or were forced to relocate, the defense collapsed. Richter watched his platoon lose 2 guns in 1 week. Crews died before they could fire a second round. He saw tracks catch on tree roots. He saw vehicles stall for seconds when crossing old farm drains. Those moments showed opportunity. Tanks were not invincible. They were machines with predictable weaknesses. Richter sketched his first idea in the dirt behind a barn. A shallow pit no deeper than a meter. Rebar driven into the bottom at upward angles. The rods arranged in a tight mesh. The trap would not destroy a tank. It would catch and twist a track. It would force a stall that exposed the vehicle to anti-tank fire. It could be built fast with salvage steel. It needed no explosives. Any infantry unit could deploy it with shovels and a sledgehammer. He called it a drain nest because its layout resembled the reinforcement grids used in old drainage pits. He brought the sketch to the regimental engineer officer. The officer dismissed it in 10 seconds. He called it improvisation with no testing data. He said it would waste manpower. He warned Richter to avoid unauthorized construction. Doctrine required standard ditches, log barriers, and mine belts. The officer issued a ban on non-standard obstacles. Richter complied. He held no power to challenge regulations. Still, he continued to study terrain each morning. He noted every place where water runoff carved channels. He observed how tank weight shifted on uneven ground. He stored each detail in memory. Pressure increased through early June. Soviet units advanced with greater coordination. German outposts fell after short fights. Reports of damaged tanks grew, yet most damage came from direct gunfire, not obstacles. Minefields were too sparse to cover all approaches. Engineers lacked time to build effective ditches. Soil conditions changed daily. Rain softened ground and reduced ditch integrity. Tanks crossed positions that should have stopped them. Morale dropped as casualties rose. On June 17, the Soviet armored reconnaissance force overran a listening post less than 3 kilometers from Richter's platoon. Survivors reported 6 T-34s, 2 light tanks, and infantry riding on top. They advanced at high speed, cut through wire, and drove straight past fields that once served as natural barriers. The division commander ordered all units to prepare for a major breakthrough attempt. Artillery batteries to the rear began relocating. Supply wagons clustered along the main road. Communications teams doubled their line checks. Richter felt the tension inside the platoon rise. Men cleaned rifles twice a day. Ammunition carriers checked crates by hand. Anti-tank gunners repositioned their 75mm pieces along the expected axis of attack. Every hour brought new reports. The Soviets massed armor in depth. A breakthrough here would expose the entire southern flank. Supplies must not fall. Every officer repeated the same message. Richter saw failure points in the terrain. A shallow slope 30 meters in front of his section funneled vehicles into a tight gap between 2 eroded mounds. Water flowed through this gap during spring melts. The soil under the top layer remained compacted and strong. Tanks slowed when crossing it. He measured that slow point carefully. 4 or 5 seconds of reduced speed. Enough time for a trap to work. Enough time for a gun crew to fire. He returned to the sketch he kept folded in his bread bag. The drain nest design remained simple. A pit 90 centimeters deep. A circular base 2 meters wide. Rebar lengths cut to 1 meter and hammered into the ground at angles between 20 and 40 degrees. Each rod pointed upward toward the direction of advance. The mesh formed a rigid cage. A passing tank would drive its track over the pit, the metal links would catch on the angled rods, tension would build and the track would bind. Even partial binding would cause a stall. A stalled tank blocked the path for those behind it. He proposed the idea again to his platoon leader. The lieutenant hesitated. He repeated the ban on non-standard obstacles. He also understood the weakness of their position. He authorized Richter to prepare the ground quietly without constructing anything. Richter accepted. He spent 2 nights mapping the soil. He collected rebar from collapsed farm structures. He hid the steel beneath brush piles. He waited. June 20th brought heavy Soviet shelling. Artillery landed in staggered patterns across the forward slope. The blasts carved fresh craters, scattered dirt over trenches and cracked wooden supports. Infantry hugged the ground. Communications lines went down twice. Forward observers struggled to maintain visibility through smoke columns that drifted over the ridge. The bombardment lasted 50 minutes. When it stopped, quiet settled across the field. Richter knew what would follow. Artillery prepared the ground for armor. Tanks attacked after silence. By 0540 hours the first engines were heard. Deep vibrations moved through the soil before anyone saw dust. The platoon readied their positions. Anti-tank guns aimed down the narrow approach. Machine gunners checked their belts. Riflemen watched the tree line where previous pushes had formed. Within minutes, the dust cloud appeared. Soviet T-34s advanced in wedge formation. Infantry clung to the hulls. The lead tank fired a high explosive round that detonated short of the German line. Shrapnel hissed through the field. Another shell followed. The assault had begun. Richter tracked the tanks as they crossed the low ridge. They pushed faster than expected. Anti-tank crews fired. A 75mm round struck the second vehicle but failed to stop it. The third tank veered left and crushed a wire entanglement. German machine gun fire swept the infantry riding on the hulls. Several soldiers fell. The tanks continued forward. They advanced toward the funnel gap Richter had studied. The platoon faced overwhelming force. The anti-tank guns fired again. One shell hit the lead tank's turret ring, causing smoke but not a full kill. The Soviets kept momentum. The platoon held for 10 more minutes before withdrawing to secondary positions. Casualties mounted. One anti-tank crew was wiped out. Riflemen fell back in pairs. The lieutenant ordered a tactical withdrawal to protect the vital crossroads behind them. The Soviets halted to regroup but maintained pressure. Engineers attempted to reinforce the line yet lacked materials and time. Communications reported larger armored elements moving from the northeast. The division warned that a major breakthrough was likely within 2 days. That evening the lieutenant called Richter to the command dugout. Mud dripped from the ceiling. Candlelight flickered over maps pinned to a splintered board. The lieutenant spoke quietly. He had little left to work with. The primary anti-tank positions were compromised. Mines were nearly depleted. Reinforcements would not arrive soon. He told Richter to prepare his rebar design. The ban still stood on record, but the situation demanded any workable defense. Richter received 30 men, shovels, hammers, and 2 hours before nightfall. Richter moved fast. He walked the platoon through the layout. He assigned pairs to dig pits at precise intervals along the funnel gap. Soil moved quickly. The men worked in near silence. The rebar pieces came from collapsed barns, broken fences, and abandoned farm tools. Each length was cut to size with a handsaw. The rods were driven into the base of each pit at fixed angles. Richter checked stability by pulling on each rod with full force. They held firm. 7 pits were completed by midnight. Raw earth surrounded them. Tracks would hide them naturally. By dawn June 21st, Richter tested the nests. He stepped into each pit and pressed against the rods. The mesh held its shape. The traps sat flush beneath loose dirt. From 30 meters away they were invisible. The platoon returned to their positions. They waited for the next assault. Tension hung over every trench. Ammunition runners prepared fresh crates. The lieutenant walked the line slowly. Every man knew the stakes. The crossroads behind them held fuel, food, and artillery shells for the division. If the Soviets broke through, the entire sector would collapse. The attack came at 0615 hours. Artillery opened first. Soviet guns fired in rolling patterns across the field. The bombardment lasted 20 minutes. Trees splintered. Dirt walls shook. When the shelling shifted rearward, the tanks advanced. Dust trailed behind their treads. Engines roared. The formation approached the funnel gap. Anti-tank gunners sighted targets. Riflemen steadied their nerves. Richter observed from the right flank. His design would be tested in real combat. The lead T-34 crossed the shallow ridge and entered the slow point he had measured. Its track sagged slightly on the left side. The tank rolled forward and hit the first drain nest. The left track compressed into the pit. The rebar mesh caught the inner guide horns. Tension built. The track jerked upward. A grinding noise followed. The vehicle stalled. Smoke pushed from the exhaust. The crew tried to reverse. The track held fast. Seconds passed. The tank remained immobilized. The second tank attempted to maneuver around the stalled vehicle. It turned right and dropped directly into the second nest. The track bound instantly. The hull twisted under torque. The engine growled. The crew fired a shell blindly, but the gunner lacked line of sight. The stalled tanks created a choke point. Vehicles behind them slowed. Dust clouds thickened. Coordination faltered. German anti-tank guns seized the chance. A 75mm round hit the stalled lead tank's side armor. The explosion tore through the fighting compartment. Another shell hit the second tank. Soviet infantry dismounted under heavy machine gun fire. The choke point trapped them in the open. More nests activated. A third tank caught on the rebar mesh and lost its track completely. The entire Soviet wedge lost momentum within 90 seconds. The platoon advanced its fire. Riflemen targeted exposed infantry. Grenadiers hurled charges toward stalled vehicles. A fourth tank attempted to push through the debris but struck a damaged hull. Its track lifted, slipped, and bound on another nest. The Soviet formation collapsed into confusion. Radio operators signaled withdrawal. The attack broke. June 21, 1943. 0640 hours. Smoke drifted low across the field as Soviet crews abandoned immobilized tanks under rifle and machine gun fire. German positions held firm for the first time in days. Richter watched the chaos unfold with a calm focus. Tanks blocked the narrow funnel. Infantry scattered. Every stalled vehicle multiplied the effect of the trap. The line, once fragile, now had breathing room. The lieutenant ordered all anti-tank crews to maintain fire until the Soviet withdrawal was confirmed. Shells continued to strike stalled hulls. Metal clanged. Flames rose from ruptured fuel lines. By 0700 hours the Soviet assault broke completely. Surviving vehicles reversed out of range. Infantry retreated to the ridge. German gunners ceased fire. The platoon emerged from trenches cautiously. Smoke obscured visibility. The smell of burning rubber and diesel hung in the air. Engineers inspected the destroyed tanks. They found tracks twisted around the rebar nests, torn guide horns embedded in steel rods, and drive wheels locked in place. The platoon gathered around Richter. They realized the scale of the success. The lieutenant sent immediate reports to battalion command. He highlighted the destruction of multiple vehicles by improvised obstacles. He noted the low material cost and short construction time. Within an hour the battalion commander visited the site personally. Shellfire still echoed from distant sectors. He examined the wrecks. He studied the pits. He questioned Richter about design details. Richter explained the layout. He described the angles, the spacing, and the soil requirements. The commander remained silent for several seconds before stating that the method was to remain unofficial but permitted in emergencies. The platoon returned to their positions. They repaired trenches and reorganized ammunition. Medics treated minor injuries. Morale lifted. Word spread to adjacent companies. Soldiers visited the site to observe the traps. They measured rods. They took notes. They marked likely terrain points for similar defenses. Richter remained busy answering questions. He remained modest. He knew the success came from precise placement as much as design. Terrain dictated everything. A nest built in the wrong soil would fail. A nest placed too deep would not catch. Each detail mattered. By midday June 21 the Soviets probed again with infantry patrols. They advanced cautiously, avoiding wrecks. German riflemen held fire until they retreated. No tanks appeared. The enemy needed time to reorganize. The lull allowed engineers to reinforce the line. They built 2 more anti-tank gun positions and added wire entanglements around trenches. Richter supervised the construction of additional nests. He improved spacing. He adjusted angles. He reinforced pits with scrap wood where soil lacked cohesion. The next major attack came at 1,540 hours. A larger Soviet force moved toward the same sector. Dust clouds formed long columns. Forward. Observers estimated up to 15 tanks supported by motorized infantry. The lieutenant briefed the platoon. He assigned gunners to alternate firing points to avoid detection. He ordered ammunition carriers to remain low. He instructed machine gunners to target infantry first. Richter positioned himself near the right flank again. He checked each nest. He cleared loose debris. He controlled his breathing. Soviet artillery opened the assault. Shells fell in tight patterns. Trenches shook. A support beam snapped. Dirt poured onto two riflemen who cleared it with their hands. Communications lines cut again. Runners carried messages. The bombardment shifted rearward after 15 minutes. The tanks advanced. Their formation was wider than before. They attempted to bypass the funnel. Yet soft ground forced them back toward it. The lead tank hit the first nest and stopped instantly. The second swerved and rolled over a hidden pit. Its right track snapped under torque. The third tank tried to push the disabled vehicles aside but slipped on loose soil and dropped into another nest. The Soviet wedge fractured. Vehicles behind them spread out in disorganized fashion. Some attempted to climb the eroded mounds but lacked traction. Others reversed into each other. Dust obscured the field. Crews fired blind. Machine gun fire from the hulls swept German positions but lacked accuracy. German anti-tank guns opened with precise timing. A 75mm round struck a stalled tank broadside, triggering an internal explosion that tore off the turret. Another shell hit the rear vehicle in the column, trapping those between. Machine gunners fired at dismounted infantry. Mortar crews targeted clusters of Soviet troops seeking cover near wrecks. Richter watched each pit activate exactly as he had planned. The nests turned the battlefield into a mechanical choke point. A Soviet attempt to flank the line came from the south. Two tanks moved along the lower ridge. They avoided the nest. The lieutenant redirected an anti-tank gun. The crew fired a single armor-piercing round that penetrated the lead tank's side armor. The second vehicle reversed at full speed and withdrew. The flank remained secure. The assault collapsed by 16:10 hours. Soviet forces withdrew again. German officers inspected the field. They confirmed 5 tanks destroyed by gunfire and at least 3 immobilized by nests. Infantry casualties on both sides remained significant. Yet the line held. The crossroads remained secure. Battalion command summoned Richter for a detailed briefing. Officers from engineer units joined. They questioned him about material needs, soil conditions, and optimal placement. Richter delivered precise answers. He emphasized shallow depth, angled rods, and terrain shaped by water runoff. He stressed that the design relied on mechanical binding rather than structural collapse. He requested more rebar and better cutting tools. Command approved the request. Word spread beyond the sector. 2 neighboring battalions asked for instruction. Richter spent the night teaching squads how to build nests quickly. Men worked by lantern light. They dug pits. They hammered rods. They asked about angles and spacing. Richter repeated each detail until they understood. He slept only 1 hour before dawn. June 22 began with reconnaissance reports warning of a coordinated Soviet armored push across a wider front. German command prepared for a major assault. Richter inspected every nest one last time. The field held 17 pits. The terrain funneled naturally. The defenses had depth. He positioned himself where he could observe early movement. The air felt heavy. The men sensed the coming storm. June 22, 0435 hours. A cold wind moved across the steppe and carried dust along the shallow ridges. The sky held a thin red band on the horizon. German sentries reported distant engine noise before first light. Soviet armored units formed up beyond the tree line. Forward observers signaled that the enemy deployed more tanks than in any previous assault on this sector. Columns stretched far to the east. Movement indicated coordination between infantry, armor, and mobile artillery. The division warned all companies to prepare for a major offensive that could decide control of the crossroads. Richter stood beside the right flank trench with a field glass. He observed faint silhouettes moving in the early haze. He recognized the spacing pattern of armored formations. The Soviets prepared a broad front push. They intended to overload the defense by sheer mass. The platoon adjusted positions. Anti-tank gunners spread out across alternate firing lines. Rifle squads reinforced each trench. Machine gun crews checked cooling jackets. Mortar teams prepared illumination rounds. Richter felt the familiar tension that came before heavy combat. He studied the field carefully. Every nest remained hidden. Soil patterns looked natural. Tracks from previous battles disguised the pits perfectly. At 0510 hours, Soviet artillery opened fire. The bombardment began with high explosive rounds impacting the forward slope. The blast shook the ground. Dirt cascaded over trenches. Shrapnel cut through sandbags. Communications lines dropped again. Runners sprinted between positions with handwritten notes. Mortars fired counter-illumination to monitor movement. Shells continued to fall for 20 minutes. The bombardment shifted rearward to target support positions. The platoon braced. Armor always followed the pause. By 0530 hours, the first Soviet tanks appeared through drifting smoke. Dozens of T-34s advanced in staggered lines. Their formations covered a wide area. Infantry followed behind in dense clusters. Soviet guns fired sporadic shells at German trenches. Dust rose in thick waves. Richter tracked the vehicles. He counted at least 20 tanks approaching the funnel gap. More moved on the flanks but slowed on soft ground. The terrain still funneled the main assault toward his nests. The trap was set. Anti-tank guns held fire until the enemy closed the distance. The lieutenant signaled restraint. The Germans needed maximum accuracy once the choke formed. The Soviets pushed forward. Engines roared. Machine guns on the hulls opened fire. Bullets tore across the parapets. German riflemen kept their heads low. The assault pushed faster than earlier attacks. The Soviets attempted to hit the line before the defenders could react. The first tank entered the slow point at the center of the funnel. It hit a nest. The left track bound instantly. The hull jerked. The engine strained. The vehicle stalled. Smoke rose from the exhaust. The second tank rolled forward and dropped into the next pit. Its track twisted around the steel rods. Richter saw tension build in the suspension. The vehicle lurched and stopped. The third tank tried to navigate between the stalled hulls but slid into the soft earth and caught on another nest. The mechanical trap activated 3 times in less than 15 seconds. The Soviets continued to advance. Vehicles behind the lead tanks attempted to maneuver around the blockage. The terrain prevented easy lateral movement. Soil softened by recent shelling made flanking risky. Several tanks became stuck before reaching the nests. Infantry grew disorganized. Dust obscured vision. German anti-tank guns opened fire. The first shell struck a stalled tank on the left. Flames erupted from the turret. Another gun hit the second stalled vehicle. The explosion ignited ammunition. The shockwave rattled the trenches. More tanks hit the nest. The mechanical binding repeated across the field. Guide horns tore off. Tracks snapped. Drive wheels locked. The choke grew wider. Vehicles collided in the confusion. Soviet infantry attempted to dismount and advance on foot but were pinned by machine gun fire. Mortar teams dropped rounds behind the stalled vehicles to disrupt reinforcements. Smoke thickened to the point where visibility dropped below 50 meters. A Soviet attempt to force the right flank began at 0610 hours. 5 tanks moved across uneven ground to bypass the nests. They struggled for traction. One vehicle sank into mud and could not climb the ridge. 2 others slowed long enough for an anti-tank crew to fire. The first round penetrated the frontal armor of the lead vehicle. The second round struck the tank behind it. Both burned. The remaining vehicles reversed quickly and withdrew. The flank held. At 0625 hours, the main Soviet thrust reached full collapse. Tanks remained stalled in dense clusters. Infantry spread out with no armored support. Artillery lacked clear targets due to smoke. German positions held steady. The lieutenant ordered all units to maintain controlled fire. Ammo must last. The Soviets attempted to reorganize but lacked space. Vehicles blocked the advance route. Communication between units broke down. Crews abandoned damaged tanks and retreated on foot. Richter moved to inspect the rightmost nests during a brief lull. He stayed low among debris. He examined the rods embedded in track links. The design functioned exactly as he intended. The upward angles forced the track to ride up and twist. The tension locked the drive system. Soil displacement matched his calculations. He adjusted one nest by removing loose debris so it could activate again if needed. By 0645 hours, German officers assessed the battlefield. They counted at least 10 tanks immobilized by nests and several more stuck in soft ground indirectly caused by the choke. Anti-tank guns destroyed another 6. Infantry fire accounted for significant Soviet casualties. The assault intended to break the sector failed. Battalion Command issued new orders. The sector was to hold at all costs. Reinforcements from the 198th Division would arrive within 12 hours. Richter was instructed to expand the nests deeper into the field. He coordinated squads to dig new pits behind burned wrecks. The men moved quickly. They understood the value of the traps now. They dug without hesitation. They drove rods with precision. Richter supervised every angle. The Soviets launched another probe at 0730 hours. Small infantry groups advanced cautiously. They avoided the wrecks. They tested German positions with sporadic rifle fire. Machine gunners responded. Mortars dropped harassment rounds. The probe withdrew. The Soviets needed time to reorganize. The German line remained intact. By midday the field transformed into a mechanical graveyard. Burned hulls lay scattered. Tracks torn from vehicles formed twisted shapes around rebar. Soil hardened under heat. Smoke drifted skyward in slow columns. Engineers documented the nests. Officers drew diagrams. Discussions spread through the battalion about adopting the design as an emergency obstacle across multiple sectors. Richter remained quiet. He observed each detail with focus. He understood that the success depended on terrain and placement as much as design. Not every field would suit nests. Soil density mattered. Water runoff patterns mattered. He prepared new instructions for other platoons. He emphasized speed, spacing, and ground reading. He worked until his hands ached. June 22, 1310 hours. The sun burned through the smoke haze and revealed the full extent of the wreckage. Blackened hulls lined the funnel gap. Tracks lay twisted in heaps where the rebar nests had caught and bound them. German infantry moved cautiously between debris to recover equipment and confirm kills. Engineers took measurements. Officers sketched diagrams to report upward through the chain of command. Word spread that the division commander wanted a detailed assessment by evening. The nests, once banned, had become the focus of the entire sector. Richter inspected each pit methodically. He checked the angle of surviving rods. He measured soil displacement. He noted how track tension differed between tanks that approached fast and tanks that slowed. He recorded distances between immobilized hulls. He studied the timing of each stall. He understood that the nests worked because they combined precise geometry with natural terrain constraints. The design forced mechanical failure rather than relying on destruction by explosive force. He explained this to engineers who followed him through the field. They asked how deep to dig, how to choose soil, and how to anchor rods. Richter answered every question with practical clarity. By mid-afternoon, Soviet forces launched a small artillery barrage to cover the retrieval of wounded infantry. Shells landed among burned hulks. The Germans kept their heads low. Once the shelling ended, Soviet medics moved under white cloth markers to pull survivors away from exposed positions. The Germans held fire as ordered. Both sides recognized a temporary halt. It lasted only 30 minutes. When the Soviets withdrew, German officers resumed inspections. At 1500 hours the battalion commander summoned Richter to a forward command post. A collapsed farmhouse served as the meeting place. Maps covered a makeshift table. Several engineer officers and staff members gathered around the commander. He asked Richter to explain the nests in full detail. Richter described every step from material selection to pit spacing. He drew the layout. He defined rod angle ranges. He specified soil requirements. He emphasized how water runoff shaped reliable ground. The officers listened closely and took notes. The commander concluded that the nests had become essential emergency obstacles. They were not official doctrine, yet they worked under battlefield conditions that left no other options. He ordered engineer detachments to replicate them across a wider sector that night. He granted Richter temporary authority to supervise construction teams from multiple companies. Richter accepted the assignment without hesitation. His engineering experience had become a battlefield asset. By 1630 hours Richter led a mixed group of infantry, engineers, and support personnel to new terrain west of the funnel. They scouted for natural slow points. They found a shallow depression near an old irrigation trench. The ground there held firm. Tracks would sink slightly, reducing speed. Richter marked pit locations with stakes. Crews dug. Sunlight faded behind drifting smoke. The men worked fast. They hammered rebar into place. They cut rods where needed. They packed soil around each pit. They built 22 nests by sunset. At 1800 hours a reconnaissance patrol reported Soviet armored regrouping 5 kilometers northeast. Dust clouds indicated movement of heavy vehicles. The division anticipated a renewed assault at dusk or early night. Patrols monitored tree lines. Mortar teams prepared illumination rounds. Machine gun crews checked belts. Richter completed his inspection of the new pits. He corrected depth on 3. He re-angled rods on 2 others. He reminded the crews that shallow depth mattered more than width. The goal was mechanical binding, not entrapment. He repeated this until they understood. As darkness set in, the step cooled. The sound of distant engines echoed through the night air. German sentries scanned for movement. Forward observers watched for flashes. Artillery units prepared pre-registered fire. Richter remained near the new nest line. He listened to the ground. Subtle vibrations traveled through soil. Heavy vehicles approached. At 1945 hours, the first Soviet tanks appeared as silhouettes against the fading light. They advanced cautiously, using lower speed and wider spacing. They attempted to probe for weak points. The Germans held fire. They waited. The tanks moved closer. Spotlights flashed briefly but failed to reveal the nests. The Soviets continued forward. They approached the new pits. The first tank reached the depression. It drove over loose soil. Its track dipped and hit a nest. The rods caught. Tension built. The track twisted. The tank stalled. The crew reversed. The track jammed further. The second tank moved to bypass the stalled vehicle but dropped directly into another pit. The track wrapped around the angled rods. The hull leaned under torque. The engine roared. It remained trapped. German anti-tank guns fired the moment the choke formed. A shell hit the immobile tank on the left. Fire illuminated the field. Another shell struck the second. The explosion threw debris across the depression. Infantry scattered. Mortars dropped rounds behind the Soviet line to disrupt reinforcements. The field turned chaotic again. Richter watched from a covered position. He observed how night visibility changed the behavior of both sides. Soviet tanks moved slower yet still fell into the trap. The nests held under darkness. The geometry was unforgiving. The terrain forced choices that the enemy could not easily change. His design continued to limit armored mobility under shifting conditions. By 2020 hours the assault collapsed. Soviet vehicles withdrew. German units held the new line successfully. Officers counted 4 tanks destroyed by gunfire and at least 2 fully immobilized by the nests. The depression became another choke point similar to the original funnel. The battalion commander praised the crews for rapid construction. He ordered additional nests deeper into the sector. Richter worked through the night. He checked soil moisture. He marked new pit sites. He oversaw digging and cutting. His hands blistered. His uniform tore. He never slowed. His expertise shaped a defensive barrier more effective than any prefabricated doctrine tool they possessed in this region. Dawn of June 23 brought a clear sky. Smoke from burned tanks drifted west. German units prepared for another day of combat. Richter inspected the field with a field glass. The nests remained hidden. The new choke points aligned well with natural features. He understood that each hour gained bought time for reinforcements to arrive. His design, born from pre-war civil engineering, had changed the sector's defensive capacity. June 23, 1943. 0615 hours. The steppe lay quiet under a pale morning sky. Smoke from the previous night's fighting thinned as sunlight spread across the wreckage. German infantry stood ready in trenches. Machine gun crews checked sights. Anti-tank gunners adjusted elevation. Mortar teams prepared fresh charges. Everyone expected another Soviet thrust. The enemy had committed large armored formations already. They would not abandon the attack without a final attempt to break the line. The crossroads behind the German sector remained the most valuable point in the region. Loss of that hub would cripple supply to nearby divisions. Richter walked the nest lines slowly. He inspected the pits built through the night. He checked rod firmness with controlled pressure. He measured soil compaction with the heel of his boot. Each detail had consequences. A pit too deep would fail. A rod angled too steeply would bend rather than bind. He understood that the nests acted as mechanical traps rather than structural barriers. He taught this repeatedly to every squad that helped him. They now understood the logic. Their construction grew faster and more precise with each new pit. At 0700 hours, scout patrols reported Soviet infantry movement near the tree line. Dust clouds formed again. The pattern indicated armor forming up behind the ridge. Forward observers counted multiple lines of vehicles. Artillery on both sides opened fire. Shells landed across neutral ground. Smoke spread thick. Visibility dropped. German lines braced for impact. At 0735 hours, Soviet tanks advanced in a concentrated wedge. Their formation aimed directly at the original funnel, the strongest German position. They pushed faster than in earlier assaults, likely aiming to overwhelm the nests before defenders could concentrate fire. The ground shook under the weight of steel tracks. Engines roared as the machines hit full power. The wedge formation spread wide across the field. The first 3 tanks hit the outer nests. Their tracks bound instantly. All 3 stalled. The next vehicles swerved to avoid them. They dropped into adjacent pits. Tracks twisted. Engines shrieked. Within 30 seconds the wedge lost its front line. Vehicles behind rammed stalled hulls and became stuck in tight clusters. Infantry riding on the tanks fell into the dirt and scrambled for cover. German anti-tank guns opened fire. Shells hit stalled tanks with precision. Flames burst from ruptured engine compartments. Internal explosions shot metal fragments across the field. Machine gun crews targeted exposed infantry. Mortar fire struck groups attempting to reorganize. The entire advance slowed. Vehicles that avoided nests became trapped behind burning hulls. The choke point widened again. A second Soviet element attempted to bypass the funnel by moving along the eastern ridge. They used higher elevation and firmer soil. Richter watched their movement. He signaled to the lieutenant. The lieutenant ordered an anti-tank crew to reposition. They moved quickly. The crew set their gun behind a low berm. They fired at the lead vehicle. The shell hit the track. The tank lost mobility and slid sideways on the ridge. The second tank reversed to avoid collision. Their flanking attempt ended in minutes. The Soviets pushed a third wave. 10 tanks advanced behind thick smoke. Visibility dropped for both sides. German positions fired by sound. Richter crawled to a vantage point and watched the movement. He listened for engine changes. The third wave slowed near the depression where the new nests were built. 2 tanks drove directly into pits. Their tracks wrapped around rods. The hulls rocked under load. They stalled. The smoke lifted slightly. Anti-tank crews fired. The shell struck cleanly. Fire spread across the depression. By 0830 hours the Soviet attack collapsed again. Vehicles burned across the field. Smoke rose in tall pillars. Soviet infantry withdrew toward the ridge. German units remained in control of the entire line. Officers counted damaged and destroyed tanks. Engineers documented each nest effect. They noted that almost every pit had contributed to either direct immobilization or indirect stall by forcing evasive movement. The nests had transformed the natural terrain into a series of controlled choke points. German command delivered formal praise to Richter. They acknowledged his engineering skill and practical innovation. They granted him authority to supervise all nest construction in the division's sector. They instructed him to create written guidelines. He began drafting them. Immediately, he defined exact angles for rods. He specified soil types for reliable binding. He detailed spacing requirements. His notes spread through engineer units by evening. As reinforcements arrived from the 198th Division, the defensive front stabilized. Officers credited Richter's nests with preventing a breakthrough that would have cost hundreds of lives. Anti-tank crews reported that stalled vehicles gave them clear shots that standard obstacles rarely produced. Infantry squads said the nests created moments of control in battles that otherwise favored armored momentum. The design gained quiet respect throughout the line. German command never added the nests to official doctrine. They remained unofficial. They spread by word of mouth. Infantry units built them where terrain allowed. Engineers used them when mines ran low. Reports from other sectors described similar success when nests were placed carefully and matched to ground conditions. The nests became a field expedient solution that required no explosives and minimal materials. As July progressed, the sector held firm. Soviet forces shifted focus to adjacent regions. The crossroads remained secure. Richter continued supervising construction. He refined the layout. He improved speed of deployment. He taught soil reading to squads that had never considered terrain as a weapon. He returned to engineering roots shaped by civilian work on municipal drainage systems. The war had turned those skills into defensive innovation. Richter survived the Eastern Front. After the war he returned to civil engineering. He designed flood channels, reinforced foundations and water control structures. He rarely spoke about the nests. Few outside his unit knew the full story. His innovation remained buried in field reports and scattered notes. Yet his design prevented a breakthrough during the summer of 1943. It saved lives in a sector where armored pressure threatened to break the line. His story became one of many forgotten moments where a single practical idea, shaped by skill and necessity, changed the course of a battle long enough for reinforcements to arrive. His rebar drain nests turned natural terrain into a defense that mechanical force could not easily overcome. His understanding of structure, soil, and stress made the difference. His quiet determination shaped the outcome of a fight that might otherwise have been lost.